Charles.
Hi, Charles. So,
Hi, Charlie.
what you guys just looked at was the demographics, the kind of who tends, underline tends, right, to vote kind of in what direction and why. That's complex enough because, again, you're trying to remember what our general demographic kind of breakdown is, how they tend to kind of vote with your kind of caveats that go with it, and the why. Now we're going to kind of think about, now where are they? Because again, arguably you could be given an electoral map and you have to think about why a particular state or region goes the way it does. I'll give a kind of a quick plug since we were just talking about what people watch, and here's something maybe you should read. It's going to be on my summer reading list. It's called The Big Sort. What it suggests is we're going to really take these demographics and kind of compound the impact because we have self-sorted ourselves geographically. In other words, people kind of deliberately settle into particular communities because those communities reinforce their identity. It's security in that sense. I'm surrounded by like-minded people and I feel better. So, you know, for example, it could be something as simple as you live in a kind of urban environment where you're in a kind of a progressive neighborhood. They have a Whole Foods. And everybody brings cloth bags and you know, drinks kombucha tea and things like that, right?
Is that the gross stuff that they put like vinegar?
Yeah, it's all the macrobiotics and things like that. And you know, so again, and I'm saying this facetiously, but you live in a community where everyone's woke, right? So it makes you feel better about who you are. We're part of this progressive community. So as silly as that seems, could you picture settling into a more socially conservative kind of, you know, type of neighborhood, or where the demographics seem a little more, you know, familiar to you? All right? So that's what this book kind of suggests, is that we've done this big geographic sort, and oh my God, do we start to compound the polarization that happens. Again, I talk about it being in your bubbles, right? You're in your little geographic bubble with your little media bubble, with your little social media bubble on top of that. And you add to the fact that, again, with Congress, especially with the representatives, we make districts that are shaped as such that you just put all those like-minded people with the like-minded media in the same place. How would a representative ever kind of break ranks? Right? The kind of the homogeneous nature of our congressional districts reinforces that polarization. At least if you're a senator, you've got a more diverse population and you've got, you know, maybe some reasons to sometimes break ranks. Does that make sense? All right? So, long story short, geography matters. And read the book. Get woke. Right?
Get woke.
So, just to show you some geography that is, the other stuff I have is, I don't want to call it trivia, because I'll show you some general trends, but it's just like little samplings, where I think, again, you might have an essay where you'd have an option of kind of picking geography. This is like likely to, you know, make its way somewhere into like a multiple choice question at least, an understanding of what was the solid South, and how this kind of geography, this geographic area really kind of helped determine electoral strategy, okay? So, you know, what you need to kind of remember is obviously what party was the party that freed the slaves? What's the party of Lincoln? Republican. So by default, those former Confederate states almost had to go Democratic, right? They went to that Democratic-Republican party that became the Democratic Party. What happens is, in 1964, you're going to have your kind of fissure. What you'll see all the way up to 1964 is, you know, the southern states going Democratic, right? 1860, you know, 1924, 1952, 1956, it's blue, it's blue, it's blue, right? But what happens is the Democratic Party kind of changes in some ways under their feet. You know, Lyndon Johnson begins to, you know, have his Great Society programs where he's going to combat poverty. Okay, maybe the socioeconomics of the South, you know, might lead them to continue to identify with the Democratic Party in its battle on poverty. But he's also waging a war on what?
Slavery.
Well, not
No,
slavery.
Not slavery, yeah. Discrimination.
Discrimination, yeah, we're waging a war on discrimination. We're championing kind of the civil rights movement here. And that begins to kind of be a wedge issue in the South, right? We talked about this earlier. The Republicans had a strategy to kind of capitalize on this. And it is calculated. You know, you can kind of couch it in the fact that they're focusing on socially conservative issues that might also play out with you know, the demographics there and religious identity, but it also played on maybe racial tensions. And as a result, you're gonna begin to see those blue states flip red. And there it is in 1964. And from 1964, something that was reliably blue, election after election, is now reliably red, election after election after election. Okay, so there is one geographic trend that you know you'd probably have to know about. Like I can see a multiple choice question about like what is the Solid South, and you may be able to use it in some ways. Other just kind of general trends, and I wouldn't expect you to remember all of this, but there's like, for example, if you remember Florida and New York, they've got certain pronounced demographics that you could use as a way to illustrate. So those two in particular you might hold on to. DC, New Jersey happen to be the wealthiest states. I don't know if that's a surprise. Mississippi is ranked the poorest, followed by West Virginia. So if you had something about socioeconomics, you know, if you looked at, okay, why did, you know, New Jersey, you know, go, if it went Republican, could I explain that with socioeconomics? If Mississippi or West Virginia went Democratic, could I explain that with socioeconomics? But they don't really actually go that way. You know, there's other issues at play.
Where do you think Massachusetts is on like the?
We're interesting, you
I don't
know.
know. I feel like we would be like really wealthy, but.
Yeah, in terms of our well, it depends. As you go west, the you know, western part of the state, you know, from Worcester and then further out, it's different. You know, Springfield. We're interesting in that we're liberal,
Yeah.
but are we? Right? And what I always remind people of is that we have that puritanical kind of background. And that's pretty inflexible. That doesn't seem like liberal by definition. This kind of, you know, idleness is wickedness, judgy part of the looking in your window to make sure you're up to good things. That doesn't seem particularly liberal. It seems kind of inflexible and heavy-handed, right? But we came over here for religious freedom, and we came over here for pursuit of happiness in a lot of ways. So in other words, when we think about liberalism, we think about it as maximizing liberty. Don't tell me what to do. It's the classic version of liberalism, where we don't want anybody interfering in us, often including government. So that's where I kind of help sort out our polar kind of personality of Massachusetts, if that makes sense. Yeah, it's you know, and you do see that liberalism as in, hey, listen, if people want to make decisions with regards to marriage and legalizing, you know, certain recreational drugs, typically we might be okay with that because that's the liberty side of it again, right? Here we are with Florida, and like I said again, you can use this for a lot. A lot of people go there to retire because of the warmth. You know, the Sunshine State. So we've got a higher percentage maybe of older people there. New York is, you know, higher population of Jewish people live there, and especially in New York City. But I can again bring back in Florida because Miami, Florida, you know, is, if I'm just looking at cities, the #2 Jewish city, where they make up 9% of the population. And more of a concentration in the Northeast, right? Catholic. Where are the Catholic states? Mostly the Northeast. Rhode Island, if that's a kind of a surprise to you, I don't know. You know that 54% of the population there is Catholic. Most of the you know, the Protestant states, and again, you've got to remember that there's like the Lutheran Church and Universalist Unitarians, but then as you get into those evangelical groups, that's down south. That's the Bible Belt. And so you're going to find you know, 10 of the most Protestant states in the South, where in some cases, you know, it's about 70% Protestant within that state. Mississippi and Alabama having like 77% there, right? New Mexico has the highest concentration of Hispanics. The name helps. Maybe remember that. California and Texas have similarly high Hispanic populations. So again, you could use that to kind of figure out issues about maybe immigration or other things, and from there figure out why voting goes the way it does. Keep in mind, again, we talked about all Hispanics not necessarily having a monolithic approach to immigration as well. That's maybe not their number one issue in some cases. If you came from a country that had communism in the past, dictatorship in the past, they're coming for entrepreneurial reasons, and maybe that all leads them to go towards the Republican Party, okay? Speaking of which, we just kind of talked about the Cuban population in that sense. So we're back to Florida. Huge Cuban American population in Florida, in particular Miami-Dade County. Black Africans, where do they live? Well, again, there was the South, and then there was the Great Migration. Remember studying that, where they kind of began during the industrialized phase to move north to go look for jobs? That's where I think, again, we got to kid ourselves. That there's been recent studies out that talk about we don't teach slavery well, in schools in particular, because we don't do the work necessarily of emphasizing the idea that you don't have this system unless there is pervasive ideas about white supremacy behind it. That we often can kind of frame it up as a peculiar Southern institution, and the North, didn't like it necessarily, thought it was going to die under its own weight, and eventually waged the Civil War. And often people get tripped up on the Civil War itself, thinking, it's a states' rights issue. Well, it wouldn't be a states' rights issue if it wasn't for slavery. Back to Mr. Lucian and Mr. DeFranco and their perennial argument, right? So, long story short, one of the things that kind of shows you that, pervasive racism had to be behind this, white supremacy, is what did blacks face when they came to the North? And again, if you live in your little segregated community where you don't have a lot of diversity, I often found that racial intolerance was greater. That when I moved to DC and I was surrounded by more diversity, you just kind of, again, it was, people knew each other, and it was harder to stereotype and to generalize, I guess, from that sense. I've noticed sometimes still, I'll be sitting with adults and there'll just be these casual comments. And by the way, the greatest thing you can ever do when something like that happens, if you're uncomfortable and you don't want to call somebody out, but you know you should, the word dude. The word dude is it's like aloha. It means 5,000 things, right? And dude can mean dude, or it can mean simply I don't like it, dude. So I use that a lot. Long story short, there is a push to go into the North, and then for a lot of reasons, a lot of it economics, it's cheaper to live in the South. Back a lot of African American went back to the South. District of Columbia having the highest percentage of blacks, Mississippi being next. New York has a tremendously large kind of, black population in terms of the numbers, but it has tremendous numbers. So the percentage there is different, right? Detroit has the highest kind of black percentage in terms of being, in terms of a city. So again, I can kind of put race and geography and issues together, and then again begin to explain votes, right? Tricky thing to do. All right, so, and I just did a sampling of that, largely because I think, I'll be honest with you, identity politics is uncomfortable. It ought to be, because I'm just like, I'm up here doing exactly what I've done, spent my whole teaching career teaching people not to do, which is generalize and stereotype. And yet I have to do it because that's the dark arts of how you win an election, okay? Now, speaking of dark arts, what we're gonna go into next is kind of keeping some of this, data and trends in mind. We're gonna talk about how you win a campaign, how you begin to kind of use certain strategies to win. And again, let's see if it sunk in, what's the number one rule?
Make it simple.
Make it simple. Take something complex and make it simple. The number two rule is momentum, right? So let's make sure we kind of hit those, that once you've got it simple and you've got momentum going, that's the key to winning a race as well. So what I have is a little, I just stumbled on this one day. It's this great little piece from a campaign advisor, and this is through the New York Times, where, he has managed several campaigns and done the media kind of aspect of managing several campaigns. And it's exactly this, that the key to winning an election is to tell a story. And the story needs to be simple. It's either about hope or it's about fear. In both cases, you're going to have a protagonist, an antagonist, you're going to have a conflict, you're going to have a resolution. Tell that perfect little story. And I want you to think as you're listening about, okay, who was this candidate? Was it hope? Was it fear? What was the narrative? And I think you'll find out he's spot on as you think about people and how they've conducted campaigns. So let's see if my little link works.
Well, here's the bottom line. People don't go to movies and they don't read a book unless there's a story. It's the same thing with campaigns. Successful campaigns tell a story. The stakes of telling a good story in politics are winning or losing. Good stories win. Campaigns without a story lose. Over the last 30 years, I've been the lead media strategist for hundreds of political campaigns for Democrats and Republicans, helping them communicate in a way that was persuasive. I spent a lot of time studying what voters are looking for, and the fundamental thing I've learned is that great storytelling is not about ideology. Great storytelling is great storytelling.
Another wild day on Wall Street.
Deadly new terror attack.
Economy shows signs of sustained strength.
Every election, we're bombarded by billions of bits of information. We want it organized so it has meaning. I mean, voters think in very simple ways. They want things communicated in an organized, compelling, but simple fashion. There has to be a narrative arc. Something that connects it all. The way we talk about narrative architecture with candidates is to put it through a filter, and the filter is to identify a threat or an opportunity, fear or hope. There's a victim of the threat or the denied opportunity, a villain, a resolution, and a hero. That's a classic narrative architecture, and so that has real power. I mean, it's like a magnet, and voters are iron filings. It just pulls those voters into your orbit. I was the lead media strategist for the Bush presidential campaigns in 2000 and 2004, and the conventional wisdom in both cases was that he was going to lose. I mean, he really had no right, conventionally speaking, winning either election. And I think storytelling was a big part of the reason he won.
Americans live on the sunrise side of the mountain. The night is passing, and we are ready for the day to come.
In 2000, he was running against Al Gore, but he was really running against Bill Clinton and his legacy.
I believe most people expect the best out of elected officials, and when elected officials disappoint them, it creates a cynical environment.
The threat was that there had been kind of cultural drift under Bill Clinton. The victims were our society and the lack of morality. The villain was Bill Clinton. The resolution was bringing honor and dignity to the White House, and the hero was George W. Bush. And so even though on all the issues people agreed with Gore and the Democrats, all the important issues, they didn't agree with George W. Bush, what we discovered was that they liked the fact that he was authentic. And maybe you didn't like exactly what his positions were, but you at least believed that he believed in what he was saying. So most of what I did when I was filming him was documentary moments from the trail, or just candid interview moments that I tease out of him, because it's really human.
I love my country. I love what America stands for. I want to remind people that we're lucky to be Americans.
And clear convictions, a strong moral component. It's just a really powerful, positive, emotional message. In 2000, 2004, less than 50% of America liked George W. Bush or his policies, and so we had a real challenge, like how do we get above 51%?
Even after the first terrorist attack on America, John Kerry and the liberals in Congress voted to slash America's intelligence operations. Cuts so deep they would have weakened America's defenses. And weakness attracts those who are waiting to do America harm.
People respond to fear because it plays on people's emotions and the things that they worry about most. So the threat now is international terrorism. The victims are 9/11. The villain is Al-Qaeda. The resolution is a very aggressive policy against the foreign threats, and the hero is George W. Bush. That's what our campaigns are all about. They're about one or two things: fear or hope.
You came here because you believe in what this country can be. You believe that we can be one people, reaching out for what's possible.
You look so young, man.
I had great admiration for all that John McCain had done and sacrificed for the country, and when somebody asked me to help him in 2008, I agreed that I would, but I said, I have a big caveat. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, there's this guy Barack Obama who's running in the Democratic primary, and nobody thinks he's going to win, but if he does win the nomination and you win the nomination, I would be uncomfortable staying around for the general election, because I think his candidacy is good for the country. I disagree with his politics, but I think he's a good man, and I don't want to be the person leading the attack against him. I actually think a lot about regret. And, you know, that's a situation where I thought about it. I said, if I work for John McCain and Barack Obama's elected and I work against this guy and have to say things that I'm not comfortable saying, I'm going to regret it. So I stepped out of the general election, and I'm glad that I did ultimately. Because that narrative that anything's possible in this country, that you can come from any background and be elected president, I thought that was a great story.
Welcome to this Republican presidential debate of the 2016 campaign.
I stepped away from presidential campaigns because I've been through the human microwave too many times and I got really crispy.
Hillary Clinton created ISIS with Obama.
He is becoming best recruiter.
He's a radical ideologue. I think you have a pathological lie.
Today in American politics, it is a win-at-all-cost environment, and it's divided our country in ways that I hope are repairable, but maybe not.
That's my favorite quote now. There's unlimited energy.
There's no question that people can be seduced by story. And so, to me, I think it's important to our democracy that voters have a sense of what we're doing, and to judge it, to test it, to see through it, and to question everything. I think it's important to know everything and question everything. That's what democracy is all about.
So I think you see that that's good, and again,
A lot of truth rings through it.
what did the narrative become in the 2018 election? Was let me know if I'm exaggerating or being a little too biased. Did the Republican side, did Trump, pick the fear narrative? The idea of, there's a threat from outside, whether it's from immigration or terrorist threats, culture, economic stability. And did Hillary Clinton manage to counter with her own narrative? Did she have, a compelling story of hope? A lot of what she gets criticized for is missing the kind of pulse of those Democratic states that went Republican and the kind of the but the economic struggle that's there.
I think you could also maybe argue that Trump ran on hope because they make America great
Yeah.
again.
So that's a really good idea about the other side of fear is the idea of hope, that these are the threats and I am the solution, I'm the hope, and I'm going to make America great again. And people hear that differently. You know, what does that mean? Does that mean 1950s kind of, you know, great again, and great for everybody? Or, so I do think that, yeah, it's, people heard that message and heard it differently. It's the, what is it, blue dress, a black dress kind of litmus test almost. It's a dress, you're seeing it as black, I'm seeing it as blue. And I think that's where we are in American politics right now. We don't agree on what we're seeing half the time. So that message could have been fear to some people and hope to others. Really good.
Also, I think just like, again, just bring it back to like the story, it's also like the method of which you tell the story, like the method of like public speaking. Like, have you ever heard of Bushisms?
Yes.
My favorite one is like George Bush, like he's up on a podium and he's saying like, he's just like, these people, like he's referring to terrorists.
Yeah.
Like, these people never stop creating and inventing new ways of hurting our people.
Yeah.
And so do we.
Yeah. You know, Obama had a way of calling people folks and things like
Right.
that.
And
So
like,
yeah,
and
there's.
Obama, like, he developed like near the end of like by the time he was going for his second election, he was like, you know, like stuttering. And he
Yep.
was like, you know, he wasn't as, he was still a good speaker, but he wasn't as like, you
Well,
know.
and what's interesting is that made him, that humanized him. You know,
Right.
it's in a lot of ways, that's what he talked about playing up here. The kind of the authenticity, including maybe not being that politician.
Right.
It's kind of funny, during campaigns, we actually want that outsider, that person that's not the slick politician. And yet when we govern, we kind of need the insider, right?
Or, or just like the way, like, you know, Trump's tone, like, people love his speeches, but if you stop and just read the text about his
Yeah.
tone, it's word garbage.
Yeah. And again, there's a whole dichotomy there. What I think helps explain it a lot is his base, you know, takes him seriously, but not literally. All right? Conversely, the Democrats, the other side, tend to take him literally, but not seriously. Do you get the kind of the flip there? So the other day he said, you know, some people say it's treasonous that the Democrats didn't stand and applaud at certain points during the State of the Union. And then he kind of echoed it. Okay, it's treasonous, it's treasonous. Now, to the base, that's just him using a little hyperbole. You know, that's him, again, I'm gonna take him seriously, but not literally. What it does on the other side, and like CNN in particular, is puts it in the outrage cycle. And can you believe he said that? And we're in a constitutional crisis because, again, they took the words seriously, but not, they took the words literally, but not seriously. Okay? So all kinds of fun with dichotomies here. So if this were not an AP class, we could be done, because the rule is keep it simple, stupid, right? But I don't get paid if it's not complex, right? I need to make the big bucks. So there's more to it, right? We're gonna drill down a little bit more beyond like, hey, keep it simple, tell a simple story. Like, one of the most simple constructs is likability. How often do we vote based on likability? You know, again, if you look at Hillary Clinton, there is the gender barrier, and I think for many people, they just felt like, oh, at one point, you know, Trump on the podium calls her a nasty woman. Is that misogynistic? Is that, you know, judging a woman by a different standard? Unfortunately, that was the hurdle that she had to overcome, was this, she's held high powers, you know, positions that are kind of, you know, high up within government. She has this vast experience, but she's not seen as likable. There's the Clinton factor as well, the kind of, you know, do they cut corners? So likability plays a huge role, and what is likable might have a gender factor, I guess is what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I know a lot of people were turned off by just the idea that Bill Clinton would be in the White House again.
Yeah, the first gentleman. So there's that likability factor on a different level. So what is likable? Well, Ike. I mean, you want evidence that we like likability, look at his campaign slogan. And when he runs a second time,
I still like Ike. He's good enough for me. Oh my God.
We're not shooting for the moon here. What else is likable? Well, self-confidence, how a person comes across. Reagan is famous for his likability. I mean, again, he's the great communicator because he had a career in movies prior to this, and he looked really good in front of a camera, and he kept it simple. He had this kind of clear stance on issues and amusing ways of saying things. We can go as simple as height. You know, the physical stature. How many nicknames has Trump given individuals based on, you know, there's little Marco Rubio, there's little Bob Corker, Rocket, Little Rocket Man, look at Lincoln without the, even with the hat, right?
Now you have 5'4" James
Yeah,
Madison.
little pocket president. So likability is an issue, and this might be disheartening.
6 foot something. 6'3", 6'4".
This might be disheartening because you're like, where are the issues? And notice what they said in the video, that ideology plays a secondary role. Like you might not like a candidate in terms of their stance on issues, but you like the candidate. So how do I choose? And we go with likability a lot more than we do with ideology, don't we? Right? So does issue voting happen? Well, yes, but man, is it hard to line up. Because think about what has to line up. Number one, you have to have a clear position on the issues. You have to know where you stand on things. Two, the candidates have to have clear positions on the issues, and they don't often. Sometimes they'll get on a stage and say, I'm for education. I'm pro people getting educated, right? And I'm pro defense as well, and I'm pro babies and elderly people.
Anti-crime.
I'm anti-crime, right? They have to give you a clear position that actually is a little more meaningful than that. And then here's the problem. What if I like a candidate where I like them on 3 of the issues, man, do I hate them on 5 of the issues, right? And that often happens. So for issue voting to happen, you have to be informed. There have to be differences between the candidates where you can distinguish, are they all anti-crime? Yes, but where are the differences, right? Are the differences consistent, and does one factor outweigh the other, okay? So how do I get those planets to align? Well, one, and I don't necessarily have it on the next slide, how many of us are single issue voters, right? Well, no, I don't know. I don't know sometimes. Like for a lot of people, it comes down to economy or abortion or environment or, I mean, there's a lot of issues, but there may be the number one thing that, you know, would cause you to abandon a candidate or support one. And I bet you all can think of one. You know, what is your burning central issue? Now, that having been said, that may be one way issue voting takes place if you're a single issue voter, but is party voting issue voting? If you have a political identity and you vote according to that political identity, that's issue voting. You picked your party ID in part because of how you were socialized at home, right? But the way that, you know, your family and you arrived at is you looked at issues and you kind of said, this party lines up with my issues, and that's where I stand. Election of incumbents is, you know, also issue voting because the incumbent has, you know, done all kinds of things to establish a legislative track record, and that's essentially on some level beyond name recognition, right, what you're voting on. So issues do play a role, right? Do you notice, again, just kind of quick trends here?
Democrats seem to care a lot more about the environment than Republicans.
So some people would miss the idea that, okay, this is about issues and what issues were the most important. But one of the distinctions you picked up is we don't agree as to which of the issues is most important, right? So we're all concerned about the economy. We may disagree as to who's going to handle it better. But there is a decided emphasis on like the threat of terrorism that the Democrats aren't as concerned with, whereas they're more concerned about the environment. You know, so
Interesting. With the exception of like terrorism, it doesn't look like, you know, nobody's blowing each other out of the water on issues.
in terms of a completely lopsided approach.
Yeah.
Yep. So what we're going to do, guys, tomorrow is we're going to start looking at campaigns. That's what we'll pick up. And again, I'm hoping just to kind of keep covering ground. So take your vitamin C. Say goodbye to Charlie.
Bye, Charlie.